Hello and welcome to PMI's Leading for Business Excellence podcast. I'm Rich Seddon, Managing Partner at PMI, the performance improvement, consulting and training firm. This podcast in our series brings you inspiring stories from across the globe and a multitude of sectors as great leaders share their experiences and insights into how business excellence has enabled them to achieve outstanding results. In this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Tanya Aitken, Chief Product and Marketing Officer at the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute. Tanya, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you with us on Leading for Business Excellence. Before we get into the detail of some of the topics we're going to cover today, I wonder if you could introduce CMI first of all, what you do and where you do it.
Great, yeah, thanks. So CMI is the only chartered professional body dedicated to management and leadership. So we exist to improve the standards of management and leadership, and to increase the number of professionally qualified managers and leaders. So we have a global community of over 200,000 managers and leaders, and really we exist to help build career confidence. We talk a lot about career confidence, and we know that CMI members are significantly more confident about their careers. And what we talk a lot about is we exist to turn accidental managers into conscious and inclusive leaders. And one of the ways we do that is through the sort of ultimate accolade of management and leadership, which is chartered manager.
Yeah, and I love that concept that you guys use of the accidental manager, because it is, and as I've heard you guys talk about it and looked through some of your materials, it is one of those things, certainly in my professional experience, that so many leaders are just assumed to be leaders because they were good at their job in the first place. And the explicit recognition that doesn't necessarily equip you to be a manager when and if the time comes. And I find the phraseology you guys use just to express that so simply fantastic. And it's so easy to communicate. Really, really effective.
We get a lot of head nods from people when we use that because it resonates. People go, "Oh yeah, I get that."
Yeah.
And they recognize it in themselves.
Yeah, that's me you're talking about.
So many people are functionally excellent at what they do, and they get promoted as a result of that. And then they sort of are in a role where they're now managing people, and they just don't have the sort of toolkit to how to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'll hold my cards out now. I've actually stolen it as well. I use it as the accidental improver as well. It's a very similar thing. People that are expected to do improvement is often in the situation where they need formal skills and equipment to do it, to be adequately equipped. Yeah, fascinating. And 200,000 people as well. I didn't realise your community was that large.
It is, and we have a really engaged community, which is great. So we have different networks that people are part of. So we have a very, very active CMI Women Committee and network. We have very involved regional boards across the country. And our membership base, which as I say, is just over 200,000.
Wow, fantastic. So that'll be really interesting. One of the subjects I want to touch on later on is in your role, how you understand the voice of the customers and those 200 and beyond your membership and turn them into tangible services. So we'll be coming on to that later on. Before we do, Great. Tanya, how did you come to be at CMI and what did that journey look like?
Okay, so I originally studied marketing at university, feels like many moons ago now. So started my career in roles around sort of marketing exec, market planning, and then moved into the more sort of insight generating part of marketing. So how do you capture insights? How do you use that in the design of products, customer segmentation, and then, moving into kind of customer acquisition and retention. And so I spent about sort of 13 years or so doing that. And then I sort of left a previous role, and I previously worked with our current chief exec, Anne Frank, a previous organization. And she just called me up and said, "Hey, can you sort of come and spend a few weeks talking to us about, where we might be able to improve certain things in our marketing activity?" And that was 10 years ago.
Oh, she pulled that trick on you, did she? Just come take a look over here, would you?
It's a very magnetic organisation. So it's a good thing that it's 10 years later and here I am. But within that, we're sort of built up, we have a little insight team now. over the course of time here, I've managed various different departments, from technology to our compliance to our research and insight. And now primarily I focus on, as Toyota suggests, our product development, which is all of the developing our professional standards, which underpin all of our products. So what does good look like in management and leadership? And then developing all the products and the content that sits alongside that back of it. And all of our marketing activity, managing our brand, our social activity, and, so how we support our sales team. So there's a lot that it sort of covers within that.
Okay, fantastic. Really interesting, actually, because so often I see people with the kind of the marketing roles as a contributor, but not necessarily a leader of the product element. So that's an interesting way that that's been put together.
Yeah, and I think in different organisations it's handled in different ways. Some have them completely separate, and I think there's pros and cons of ways of organising it.
Sure.
But I think for me, it's really important, I spend time with my team to make sure that we're bringing those two areas together. Because, if our marketing team can't articulate what our products are, then there's no way that we can sell them to anyone else at the end of the day. So for me, it's really important that those teams are working lockstep together.
Okay, fantastic. So first discussion point then, Tanya, if I may. I'm really interested to understand what you see as the key challenges and opportunities facing new and future leaders, full stop, and then established leaders as two separate audiences. Maybe you disagree, actually. I'm seeing them as two separate audiences, but I'm really interested to see what your take on that is. What are, from your view, with that kind of audience and that reach you've got, what are you seeing right now as the key challenges and opportunities?
So one thing I think, just before I delve into the kind of the two different groups, I think overall what's really important to recognise is how important management and leadership is to organisations. So it is the number one driver of productivity. So when we hear government talk about, we need to drive innovation, or we need to improve healthcare, or we need to grow the economy, all of that effective leadership is absolutely at the core of being able to deliver any of that. So we know from research that we've done that organisations that have effective management and leadership programs on average have 23% better result, and they are 32% more productive. So there's a really strong case for why management and leadership is important. So then moving on to those two groups, I think, and we've touched a little bit on this before, but the new and the future managers, that's where, not uniquely, but that's where very often we see the accidental manager, where people are promoted into these roles and they're left to flounder a little bit. And the challenge with that is that, what that does is it not only affects teams that they're managing, but it really destroys people's self-confidence and their own sort of belief in their ability to be able to do a role, because they don't have the skills to know how to do that. So it's really important that we recognise how important it is to train managers, either those who are aspiring to become managers or those that have recently moved into management roles. We don't have to wait until somebody's in a management role to prepare them for that next step.
So just recap those stats for us again then, sorry, those two items you mentioned.
So in terms of the overall management impact, so organisations that have effective management and leadership programs see that they get 23% better results.
Right.
And they are 32% more productive.
I mean, the productivity one in particular is fascinating, isn't it?
That's really is
amazing.
Yeah. And so if we want to achieve any of these things as in Britain and globally to help grow our economy, management and leadership is absolutely at the heart of that. And unless we recognise that, we will not be able to achieve all of those things.
Sure.
So it's absolutely vital that we recognise what it's a bit.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
And, and it's really important as well when you're thinking about training your sort of managers. It's a great acquisition and a retention tool. We know how difficult it is at the moment to get good people through the door and to keep them. And if you can demonstrate that you are investing in people and that they have a progression pathway through the organisation, particularly for those new and aspiring managers, that is a great way to show people that you're really invested in that.
Mm-hmm.
And has, without doubt an impact on their retention. And, things like apprenticeships, for instance, are a really great way of doing that. So CMI has helped sort of part of the Trailblazer group for the management and leadership apprenticeship. And it's a great way of driving up social mobility as well. So we know that 71% of management apprenticeships, or rather management apprentices from families where neither parent has been to university before, which is a key measure of social mobility. And, a higher than average amount are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So it's a great way sort of increasing social mobility. But at the heart of it, if you want to have a culture where people have the skills to be able to manage and lead as they come up through the organization, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about this when a bit later in the conversation, but it's really important that we train people to be able to have the skills to do that. So I guess then for established leaders, management leadership is just as important in those groups. And I think what's important there is, so many of us, and I'm sure we are all at fault of this at times, can get complacent about our own skill set. But, you have to accept that you don't know it all and that we all have something to learn. And often we have something to learn about those new and aspiring people that are coming through the organization. And we have to be really open to that, because that's what allows us, we talk a lot about CPD at CMI, continuing professional development. So making sure that you're keeping your knowledge and your skills up to date. And one of the ways that we encourage people to do that is becoming chartered. So becoming chartered, and it exists in other professions as well, but it is the ultimate recognition of the management and leadership profession. And it is a profession. So many people do not think of it as so. How many people, when asked what they do, would say, I'm a manager, or I'm a leader. It is a profession, and we need that same level of parity with other professions. So whether it's chartered accountant or chartered engineer. So becoming chartered is, a hallmark of excellence to show that you have those appropriate skills. And it's a great way, particularly with those more experienced managers, to give them that safe progression pathway and to allow them to show that they have that hallmark of excellence.
I guess one of the things that I see if you agree with this and see the same, particularly for the established leaders, it's not just the difficulty of the recognition, as you say, that we all need to continue development. It's making the time for it as well is tough too. And seeing that actually this is a worthwhile investment. And is that something you recognise?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And actually, we've got some great research that shows why it's important. So we've done some independent research with Oxford Economics into the impact of chartered managers particularly. And so there is real economic benefit in doing this, so making the time to do this. So we see on average chartered managers achieve a £13,000 pay rise as a result of becoming chartered, that they are able to give back over £300,000 into their organisations in terms of incremental value over the course of a 5-year period, and that they contribute an incremental £22,000 into the wider economy.
Wow.
So there's a real financial benefit of doing this. But then there's some of the softer measures too. So we see with chartered managers that 91% report an increase in their own self-awareness, which is such important, and 88% improved self-confidence. And that has a halo effect on the rest of their team, the teams that they're managing. We see better employee engagement as a result. And many of these then as a result go on to upskill their own teams as a result. So there is a much wider benefit. So it's really important to invest in our own skills in that way. And that is a great way of achieving that. And it isn't a huge amount of time. It's not loads of exams that you have to do. It is a very reflective process through a professional discussion where you reflect on how you've dealt with things as a manager, what you might have done differently, and most importantly, what the impact of your actions and your skills and your experience has been in the workplace. We hear loads of great stories from people saying the positive impact it's had on them as a leader on a day-to-day basis.
And I'm right in thinking you've got some quite large organisations effectively mandating and bringing this as part of their professional development programmes, haven't you?
Yeah, we do. We work with, so we actually work in partnership with over 140 universities. So we accredit a lot of business and management courses at both undergraduate and postgraduate level. And we also work with over 600 training providers, both private colleges, as well as directly with lots of different employers to make sure that we are able to have the greatest impact we can in sort of raising the standards of management.
So a first touch point for you guys, if you are kind of engaging with a new organisation, do you find the organisation gets it? Do you find they understand the need and the description you've just given? I'm sold. But
Yes.
anyone would think you're in marketing. But in those kind of initial conversations, what's the understanding and comprehension like?
Yeah. Do you know what? I think it sometimes depends. I think there are some organizations that inherently already get it and they sort of recognize the need and they're proactively coming to us and saying, like, okay, we want to, we want to do better, or we want to sort of charter groups of our managers. So a great example, Bob Crine, who's the Vice Chancellor of Huddersfield University, recognized the importance of charter manager. And he sort of mandated that all of his senior leadership team would become chartered. And they went through that process together. And actually, they're then sort of, you're kind of uniting people again behind a common purpose within the organization. And so it actually brings people together because it's agnostic of what function you're in or even what industry you're in. So you might be, you might have somebody who's an accountant, someone over here who works in HR. You might have someone else who's responsible for student recruitment.
It's kind of cross-functional sense.
Exactly. You bring all of those people together. And so that's a really great example. But yeah, there are other organizations where, we have to, as you said, sort of take them through the evidence of why this is not a tick box exercise. It's not a nice to do. It's fundamentally important and it has real economic business benefit.
Yeah, fantastic. That's brilliant. So on that note then, tell us a bit about how you go about understanding the voice of your customers and wearing your kind of product hat, turning those into tangible services.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. As I said, my background is a lot in sort of developing insight. And so absolutely key to understand what the customers want and need. Because otherwise you can waste a heck of a lot of time and money building things when that is quite we wanted and things, theoretically sit on shelves. So it's really important to us at CMI, and we have a number of different ways that we go about doing that. So, in some cases we do quite sort of big research studies, but we have something called our Manager's Voice Panel, which our members are invited to join if they want to. And that gives them a voice. So we do sort of every couple of weeks, we go out and ask them all different questions. And that really helps up from a policy perspective and the conversations that we might be having with policymakers.
Right.
We can really bring that voice of managers and leaders to those sorts of discussions. And so some good examples of where we've sort of utilized insight. So, and we go out to our members, of our learners, our partners, and we talk to them about, what we might be thinking about at that time or their needs might be, where the gaps are. And so at one point we were hearing from members that they really wanted a way to self-assess themselves, so to understand where their skills were at and know what level they were at. So we developed what we call our management diagnostics.
Okay.
So this is something all of our members have access to, and it allows somebody to self-assess themselves against a series of questions. So we take them through about 50 questions that are aligned to a professional standard, and they differ slightly depending on what level you're at your career. And then it comes back with a personalized report to tell you, well, this is how you rate. Again, maybe your communication skills are great, but problem solving, you need a bit of extra help. And we'll then direct resources that can help sort of plug those gaps, essentially. Another good example would be, we did a piece of thought leadership called Work Ready Graduates. And it was looking into what employers sort of felt about the graduates that were coming into their organization.
Okay.
And what it found was that 80% of employers thought the graduates were not arriving in the workplace with the core skills that they needed to be effective straight away.
Sure.
So things like communication skills, problem solving, critical thinking, decision making, those sorts of things. And so off the back of that insight, and there's a sort of a full report we can share with you, but off the back of that, we developed something called our employability bootcamp. So it can be used by universities, not just in business courses. The key thing is that these skills are needed regard whether you're studying engineering, fashion, biology.
Yes.
When you're arriving in the workplace, these skills are just as important, and they can be used by universities. So it's a diagnostic that somebody starts off sort of looking at their skills, and then it's 4 modules of some e-learning that people can do, and then they go back and take the diagnostic at the end and shows them how much their skills have moved, what the progression has been as a result of their learning, and then it gives them a nice digital badge.
Okay.
So that's a good example of where, we'd sort of done that research to look into, well, what is it that employers are thinking and needing, and how can we help achieve that by working with our university partners. So, gathering insight generally is just so important, the voice of the customer, and making sure that the insight you're getting is representative of your overall customer base. The last thing you want to do is, go out and ask the small proportion of people who don't, who aren't representative of your wider customer base, because you will inevitably fall down and miss something.
Yeah, and the job here, of course, is to try and disprove your own theories, I guess, really, as well.
It is, because it's so easy to go into thinking, oh, I know what people want. And then you've really got to check yourself that you aren't just looking for confirmation bias where, right, okay, how do I angle this research to tell me what I want to hear? Because you're not going to come off any better as a result of that.
Yeah.
So we've got some research out in the field at the moment, talking to people about on the sort of digital environment. And we're sort of actively saying, right, just be really, really honest with us, because that's what's going to help us make things, as good as they can be. There's no point guilt for Lily, because, that we don't learn anything from that.
It's interesting you mentioned about on the subject of grads. I've seen several courses recently, university and masters and undergrad level courses, and it's notable to me that unless a course, particularly in technical subjects like engineering or medicine, unless the program has a specific management in ... kind of title.
Yeah.
A lot of those management skills that, as you say, are needed and necessary and essential are often not in curricula in any kind of meaningful way.
Right.
I've seen medical courses with critical thinking in and a bit of leadership in. But actually, the expectations of healthcare services, and particularly in the NHS these days, is there's so much leadership and management skills required, and it's done by the power of assumption.
Yes, it is. And that, those are the findings from the Messenger review. So it's absolutely critical. And so we should start right early on and start to embed those skills, because it's far more effective to do that than to wait till somebody is in a much more senior position and it's going to be a lot busier and a lot more, in often cases, a lot more reluctant to want to sort of go through that in a more formal way in developing those skills. So that's why we encourage it, and we work, as I say, with so many universities to try and embed that early on.
Mm-hmm. And just reflecting back, I've just had a glance at my notes here. While you were talking, I made a note to, you're sitting below the kind of the chartered status. You talked about the skills diagnosis. What was the language?
Diagnostics, management diagnostics.
The management diagnostics. So thinking about the management diagnostics, sitting below the chartered status, you've got a plethora of solutions there as well, haven't you, for skills and capability development?
Yeah, we do. So we support people, right from very early on in their careers. So that could be school leavers. So we develop, so we have qualifications. We try and avoid using levels, because most people outside of this world, no one has a clue what those are. But level 3 roughly equates to a sort of equivalent of A levels, just to give you an idea. And 4, 5, and 6 kind of moving into university, and then 7 and 8 is sort of postgrad.
Mm-hmm.
So we have qualifications that span level 3 up to level 8.
Right.
We have apprenticeships, we have bite-size programs, we have, lots of member resources that we give to people. So, if you're a member, you get access to, we have a management and leadership resource portal called Management Direct. It has hundreds of thousands of management and leadership resources designed to be used on the job. So you're about to go in 10 minutes and you've got to have a difficult conversation with someone. How do I go about doing that? You can just tell it,
what have you got for me?
We have a mentoring platform. We have something called our Career Development Centre, which has loads of great and all AI-based CV and interview tools. So it will review your CV, it will sort of conduct mock interviews. We have events that people have access to, loads of thought leadership. I mean, lots of resources that support people on a day-to-day basis. So there's the formal side of going through and undertaking some management and leadership training, including apprenticeships, qualification, things like that, boot camp. And then there's that day-to-day sort of CPD that we can all engage in. You don't have to set aside, 2 days of your week to be able to do that. You can, think, right, I've got 10 minutes. I'm just going to take that. That's a really easy way of us all sort of keeping our skills up to date.
Fantastic. So one of the subjects we haven't touched on yet, and I know you guys do a lot of work on, is the gender gap. So I've got a question I'd like to pose to you. Why aren't organisations closing the gender gap faster? And do you think people and organisations are taking it seriously enough?
Great questions. And you're right, we spend a lot of time talking about this. So the gender pay gap, unfortunately, if you look at the figures from ONS, which at the moment are up to April of last year, they're just processing the new ones at the moment, but it's getting worse, not better, which is alarming. And that is for a number of reasons. So if I touch on a few of them, what we would call unpaid labour. So women still bear most of the sort of household and caring responsibilities, and time that is spent out of the labour market affects progression, it affects earnings. And the fact that when you look at the gender pay gap, it's actually worse when people sort of move into their 30s and 40s. So as you get older, it gets worse because you have women leaving the workplace for either sort of caring or parental responsibilities. And then when they're returning, it's not at the same level and it's not at the same salary. So that's one of the challenges. The second is something we call occupational segregation. So women are actually overrepresented in roles and industries that traditionally are more insecure and less well paid.
Right.
So, for instance, health and social work, 4 in 5 jobs in that industry are held by women and, tend to be less well paid. And so the ONS have actually calculated that this, what they call occupational segregation, accounts for 23% of the gender pay gap. So, so that's a real challenge. Generally underrepresentation. So there is a lack of women in higher paid leadership roles. So looking at our analysis that we've done, women make up 48% of the working population. So we're 52% of the overall population, 48% of the working population. But we only make up 41% of sort of senior roles and 38% of sort of C-suite roles. So there is a real gap there. And we've actually calculated that to close that gap, we would need over 500,000 more women in management roles. And actually, that's going to accelerate to more like 800,000 by 2026. So for us to get that proportionally right, which will help address the gender pay gap, that's what we would need to do. The other one is wage negotiation. Women are far less likely than men to negotiate a better salary, either a starting salary or a pay rise. And so those are just some of the obstacles that sort of stand in the way of the gender pay gap being sort of got rid of. But, that a lot of organisations, we have something at CMI that we call the say-do gap. So as last year, as part of our 75th anniversary, we produced a report called The Everyone Economy, which again, you can share with your viewers. And one of the things coming out of that, it was looking at what we need to be able to create inclusive workplaces, not just through the lens of gender, but through socioeconomic background, ethnic diversity, LGBTQ, disability, etc. But one of the things that we found universally across all of those minority groups, and by the way, let's not forget, women are not a minority, we are the population, but what we found is there is this say-do gap. Organisations saying that they do lots of things, but when you actually look at what they're doing or you talk to the employees, there is a big gap versus what is actually happening. And so that really needs to be addressed.
It's interesting because this is a subject I spend a lot of soul searching doing in our business. So, for example, we're at SME. we've got, I'm delighted and proud to say, so I'm the only man on our board. We've got a 75% female board. But in our consulting team, we are majority male.
Right.
And it's interesting when you're talking about profession bias. Maybe women are too sensible sometimes, I think to myself, to become management consultants in the first place. But it's something that, as far as we can see as an organization, there are no barriers to it. And I'm really intrigued by the things we could do to increase the number of women in our consulting team.
Yeah. And half of it is like, know your data, know what it is that is driving you not having a better balance. Because, inevitably the clients that you're working with, you want to make sure that your consulting teams are representative.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise there's a real challenge there. And to your question of do organizations, are people taking it seriously enough? I mean, the simple answer is no. Very often organizations have a one and done kind of approach.
Yeah.
This kind of, oh yeah, that old thing, or you get eye roll.
Yeah. But we've got the policy. It says,
exactly.
It says no discrimination.
Right, exactly. That's done.
Yeah.
That's done. But we did some research, and this was, oh my goodness, this kind of crushed me a little bit. So male managers are twice as likely as female managers to say that too much effort is being put in by organizations to achieve a gender-balanced management team. Secondly, they're twice as likely to say that their organizations can successfully manage future challenges without a gender-balanced. So there is not an acceptance that there is still work to do here. You get not in every case, obviously, but you get eye rolls at, haven't we talked about already? Haven't we done? And so it is slightly crazy that we still have to have the conversation of why it's important and what the business benefits are, because, there are huge business benefit of why organizations should be doing this. There's great studies from McKinsey and PwC. So McKinsey say the companies that are in the top quartile for gender diversity on exec team, 25% more likely to experience above average profitability. So there's a real business case for why organizations should be doing this, not just have done the policy. The other thing is that it needs to start from a much earlier point in the pathway. So when I look at what happens in our education system, so I have a little anecdote which I like to share with people because it is so. So I have two children, two sons, and when they were younger, there was a Mother's Day assembly at school, which I went along to. We have very flexible working at CMI, so that was pushed along to that. And I heard the children singing a song that went, "My mum's one in a million. She may not have a degree, but she cooks and cleans and makes a nice tea." And that was exactly my reaction. My jaw hit the floor. And I made a very urgent appointment with the head at the time because I was just astonished that we would be instilling that in children at the age of 5. I was just couldn't get over it.
Sure.
That anyone would have thought that was acceptable. So we have to, that's not even unconscious bias, it's very conscious bias. You have to eliminate that from a very early age, because that's the only way that future generations have any hope of trying to shift this gap. We continue to reinforce that messaging in our children as they then join the workforce. What hope do you have?
Yeah, quite. Yeah, and it's something that I've had several conversations with clients around this issue. And they'll say, we've done everything we can. We've it doesn't matter whether whatever gender you are, you can get a role here. But without looking at the mechanics of what it is that different people and different groups of people require in terms of role makeup, and therefore you get barriers that aren't necessarily physical barriers of prevention. But it's barriers to attracting women in the first place into different roles. It's just the way we work, isn't it? And
things like flexible working, right? I mean, the pandemic in many ways forced a lot of organizations to think that way, but there's many now trying to move back from that. And, dictating when people and how often people should be back in the office. And I get there's lots of benefits from people sort of being around their colleagues, but unless you embrace flexible working to some degree, you are never going to be able to fully attract the talent that we are missing from a gender perspective because of that.
Well, and then loop that back to, I'm really struck by that stat you gave at the opening of this session around productivity and management and leadership being the key to unlocking 33%, I think you mentioned. Productivity, you're ignoring 49% of the population here that has the potential to help you solve your productivity gap.
Exactly. You've got to, we call this concept of wasting talent. And unless we are sort of attracting that talent right across all sort of groups, then we are missing a huge.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. Really interesting discussion. And I hope it's given plenty of people food for thought.
Sure.
So, moving into the section about you then, Tanya, can you tell us about some of your key influences and experiences other than horrifying school assemblies that have shaped you as a leader?
Yeah, so I count myself lucky in a way that I have worked for some incredible leaders and also some truly horrific ones, which actually gives you a really good frame of reference of not just what good looks like, but also the impact of bad. So early on in my career, some of the behaviours that were just normal in the workplace will never be accepted now, particularly towards women. So we would call microaggressions now. So, referring to people as darling or love, and looking at people in a very inappropriate way. This general accepted misogyny, particularly within the C-suite, and this kind of concept of an old boys network, that to me for years was just unfortunately accepted. But then you learn a lot about, and at the time I worked for an incredible woman who I learned a huge amount from in terms of how to kind of break some of that down and really how to have a voice in the room. So she was just fantastic. And then sort of some of the other experiences when I had my children, so I had them both quite close together. So when I returned from maternity leave the second time, and I was only off there a couple of months, but I had been completely sidelined in terms of my role. My job had been pretty much diminished and, kind of something, a faux sort of job had been invented. And I was working for somebody who was definitely the definition of the other end, absolutely terrible, who just chipped away at my confidence and my self-esteem, was particularly anti-people children, which Madeleine Albright, who was the first ever female US Secretary of State, has a saying, which is there's a special place in hell for women who don't have other women. Well, and this particular manager makes me think of that statement. Because she was just went out of her way to do anything but help and just made it so horribly uncomfortable, for an organisation which I had really loved working for prior to that. And, I voted with my feet a day. And that's what people do these days, is that they will not tolerate organisations that treat people that way. The me now might have had the confidence to have challenged it, but this was some time ago. And, again, you learn a lot from any of these sorts of experiences. And it taught me not to dismiss what is going on for people outside of their working life. So, we know that one of the number one impacts on somebody's happiness at work is their line manager. So you have a huge responsibility in the way that you manage it. And, and only 1 in 5 people, by the way, rate their line manager as effective. So for me, it taught me that, I need to make sure that I'm cognizant of what's going on for people outside of work. And being human in the way that I manage, it's so important that we remember people have stuff going on in their lives. And the more empathetic you can be to that, and the more that you treat people, in a human way, which you think would go without saying, but it isn't always the case. People are far more loyal, they're far more productive, they're far more, eager and keen to do a good job if you treat them well. And that's why there's so much more focus these days on things like employee engagement and employee satisfaction. But it is so important, and you as an individual leader have such a huge role to play in that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned about my own management style and my leadership style is I'm a reflector by nature. I certainly look back at my younger self and realize how little appreciation I had of that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and the kind of clean lines and black and white view of the world where I saw, that's work, this is not work.
Yeah.
That comes with experience and maturity, I guess. And it's in later life you're able to talk about it more, I suppose, a bit like therapy. But yeah, from my own experience, it's reflecting on that responsibility, and ultimately, especially these days, in many developed economies where there is not a lot of free and available talented labour washing around the place, rightly so, your employees will vote with their feet. But
absolutely,
boy, do people not appreciate that, and they're all they scratch their heads and are offended when people resign.
Yeah. Don't wait till the exit interview to work out what you've been doing wrong, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, interesting. So you've alluded to a bit of it here. So you're shaped by those experiences. Tell us about your decision-making style, and where do you sit on consensus, and how do you achieve it?
Yeah, I mean, decision-making, again, insight is that, like, I'm somebody who I like to have a decent amount of kind of insight and data to back up the decision, so that it's not just all time, basically. I think it's important that we use data to help us make decisions. I do think there is a little bit of gut and experience that comes into the mix as well, because you learn things over time and you can reflect on those. But it's important to hear from the voices in the room. I think I never want to just be someone who's just out there on my own making decisions and then just telling my team, right, get on and do this.
Yes.
It's important to listen to those voices and having the right voices in the room as well. And we had our CMI Women Conference recently. We had Baroness Martha Lane Fox doing a keynote speech, and she was fantastic. And she was talking about the fact that when Apple developed their Apple Health app, so they'd spent ages designing it so that it captured your steps and your heart rate and all these other things. But they didn't have anything to do with periods or anything to do with that. So they had no men in their product team at all. So when they're making decisions, they had no women in their product team at all. So, they've got a room full of men and none of them are thinking of that. So when they're making decisions, they did not have the right people in the room to be giving, the right insight to be able to make those decisions. So that was a real miss. So I think it's really important that you hear from the right people and that you've got the right evidence to back up you're doing as a decision. I mean, there are times where you have to just make it can't be constantly, committee-based decision making. I love the notion that the camel is a horse designed by committee. It's about making sure you've got that right balance of, right, I need the right data and the right voices, but then I have to have the leadership to make it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Leading with consensus and consensus decision making doesn't equal committee making decisions.
No, it doesn't. People need to feel involved in the decisions so that they don't feel that stuff is happening to them. So they need to feel part of, so if, whether it's product development or marketing or whatever it might be, people want to feel, he empowers them to feel part of that process. But equally, nothing would ever get done if every decision had to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about other leaders you admire, tell me about that. Who and why?
Well, so I feel very fortunate that through CMI, I've been able to meet many amazing leaders. We give out something called our gold medal every year, and also a lifetime achievement award.
Okay.
And so through that, we've had some incredible leaders. But I think for me, Dame Stephanie Shirley, often known as Dame Stevie Shirley. So those people who don't know, she is a tech entrepreneur, a philanthropist. And so she set out her organization, which is a tech-based organization. And she did it at a time where women weren't starting businesses. And she was the first person to truly embrace. She actually made a point of only hiring women, and they all worked from her into this tech organization, which was just the first back then. But what was slightly shocking is that when she went to open her bank account to start this business, she had her husband's signature on. So I left one. But she found that when she was writing to people to get them involved in her organisation, people just weren't responding. So that's why she changed her name to Stevie from Stephanie, or went by the name Stevie, because when she signed that at the bottom of letters, doors open. And so she really pioneered so much in terms of championing women in the workplace. She's got a wonderful book called Let It Go, which I'd encourage you to read. She had a son who had autism, and I also have a son who has autism, so I really related to that. And she has just done so many incredible things. You know, I had time sort of as part of her career, and since as a more focused on philanthropy, that for me, she is truly just inspirational. I think she's amazing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Not one we've had before, so that's fantastic. So, final question for today. Key advice you would give yourself earlier in your career?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's probably a whole ton, but I think listening to people around you and drawing on the other people's strengths and skills. Like, you don't have to be amazing at everything yourself, which I think in your younger days, you feel like you have to do.
Yeah.
And then as you sort of progress and you're working, you've got teams around you, you suddenly go, actually, no, I'm going to play to the strengths of the people around me and my team. You know, may probably have a lot more experience than they can teach me. So I would definitely have said that to myself, and also probably cut yourself some slack. I think, you know, I certainly, I still think now, so I should be advice to myself now, but you talk about being a reflector. I think I definitely have a tendency to, you know, analyze, oh God, what did I do there? Could I have done it better? And, you know, which, you know, sometimes is a good thing, but I think if you do it too much, you can beat it too much. So I don't know, so be the other bit.
That's fantastic. I'm sure many people, including myself, will relate to that. So Tanya, it has been fantastic. I know my way around these things enough to know our audience will absolutely love this session when they come to listen to it. Thank you so much for joining us and Leading for Business Excellence. It's been a joy and a pleasure, and also really insightful at the same time.
Thank you. Thanks, Rich. And I would just like to extend an offer to all of your viewers that if they want to find out more about CMI, if they want to become a CMI member, we would be very happy to offer all of them a 1-month free membership. So they just need to search, go onto Google, search CMI Confidence, and come and join us.
So that is amazing, and thank you very much. There's loads of resources we've talked through, and we will endeavour to document those and put them all into the show notes for you. Do feel free to reach out to us and drop us a line, team@pmi.co.uk. And also look out for all episodes of Leading to Business Excellence. That's this series, which are conversations like this, in addition to our Common Sense series, which you'll find in the PMI Knowledge Hub. Once again, Tanya, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Rick.